There we are.
We are going to call the Novi Board of Education regular meeting to order. Tonight is October 20th. If we can please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. If I can get a motion for approval of tonight's agenda.
So moved.
Support.
Recommended by Mr. Mena and supported by Mrs. Roney. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, motion carries 6-0. We will start our agenda with awards, recognitions, and celebrations, and the first one on the list is the National Merit Semifinalist. Mr. Meinkoff.
Thank you. This is my first opportunity to have met some of these amazing scholars, and this is an absolutely incredible celebration for our district. And so I would like to ask that our very spectacular high school principal, Mrs. Carter, please come up and present our finalists tonight.
Good evening. Thank you, Superintendent Menka and the Board of Education. As you all know, it's another great day to be a Novi Wildcat. Tonight, I have the distinct honor and privilege of introducing to you Novi High School's National Merit Semifinalist. Approximately 1.5 million students in more than 21,000 high schools entered into this scholarship program. Only 16,000 of these students qualify as semifinalists. We have 29 students who have qualified. These students represent less than 1% of U.S. high school seniors. Our 29 National Merit semifinalists have taken 273 advanced placement courses, 44 international baccalaureate courses, and 43 dual enrollment courses. What a remarkable feat for high schoolers. These young people are by far our brightest and best. So here is a photo of all of them. Just so you know, when I do the recognitions, I will say every single student's name, even though some are unable to be with us this evening due to prior commitments, whether it be robotics or employment, definitely dual enrollment classes. They definitely have priorities, and they're phenomenal. So, without further ado, scholars who are present this evening, when I call your name, if you could be so kind as to come to the podium, I will give you a certificate, and then I will ask you to come and stand in the front of the board members so that we can get a group photo at the end. So our first National Merit semifinalist, Julia Araju. Vishal Bayapati. Adan Brajesh. Meghana Jarapala. Pulkit Chudhuri. Kevin Chen. Emily Choi. Nikhil Daniel. Jonathan Dorella. George Elagajagakal. Thanks, George. Akil Gogajanini. Andrew Kim.
Cool.
He's also our student body president at the high school. Allison Liu. Saad Palmyra. Abi Paribakam. Arnav Patri. Atharva Rai. Paran Razada. Harini Ram. Krisha Ramani. Magna Reddy. Meghana Sethi. Shreyas Shavistava. Saranya Singh. Rishi Tapeta. Devansh Tayal. Hung Young. Casey Zhang. And last but not least, Ish Patel. Congratulations. Also, I would like to express gratitude to George Sipple, who dedicates time and energy to create this beautiful webpage of our National Merit Scholars. I think it's critically important that our students are able to tell their story. So please take the time to check this webpage out. It shares with you insights about our students, what school-related activities that they're involved in. They describe their favorite teacher. They describe their favorite quote. They share with you basically their why, their point of pride in regards to being a Novi Wildcat. I would be remiss not to thank the parents, guardians, families, and friends who are present here this evening to celebrate and honor these dynamic scholars. So please join me in another round of applause for Novi High School's National. Thank you.
Who's gonna take a picture? Okay. Good job, guys.
Thank you.
Congratulations again, and thank you to Mrs. Carter for that presentation. It's now time for opportunity for other celebrations. So if anyone has, any board member has any other celebrations that they'd like to share, please do so now. Mr. Cook?
Yeah, I've got a couple. First and foremost, I was able to attend the high school choir concert on Tuesday. Mrs. Sherrick has the kids all singing greatly. They also, being raised by a choir director, I know how hard it is to sing with accompaniment, but each of the 5 groups sang a cappella also, and rarely missed a beat. So congratulations to them. The other thing is, I'm reminded of what Mr. Bricky had told me at one time, and he said, give kids an opportunity and they will exceed or far exceed your expectations. And we have a young student that helps out doing instant replay, and he took that information and he created this video for WMNS. You know, so it goes to show that if you just give the kids an opportunity, they will far exceed your expectations. He created this highlight film of the homecoming game, narrated along with it, and I want to thank JP for the work he's been doing and the work he will continue to do, because a lot of these opportunities can lead to careers, as we've seen some other students. But JP, he took it upon himself to do this. It was not asked as part of his class, but he did it. And he exceeded the expectations, got a round of standing ovation from his classmates on it. So just wanted to recognize him.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. What a great video. Any other celebrations that anybody would like to share? There will be opportunity for board comments later, but if there's anything that you think you'd like to share with the community? We have students here right now, and I'm not sure how long they'll be in our midst.
And did you mention anything about the Community Financial Day? Did that come up?
You know what? I had it in my superintendent's report, but I think that'd be good for you to mention since you were a big part of it.
We had an opportunity, Ben joined a local credit union, Community Financial Credit Union, and they had their first employee team meeting, if you will, that they've had in Michigan since the pandemic. It was held at the Suburban Collection Showplace, and they had approximately 350 employees all there. Then they had at one point their leadership team up on stage that was talking to them about being a part of the community, and obviously with the name Community Financial, it's an important aspect of what they do. They invited Superintendent Micah to get up on stage and talk a little bit about what we're trying to do to enrich the lives of our students. And Community Financial partnered with the Friends of Novi Schools and made a gift of a little over $13,000 to offer support in all 7 of our buildings. It included little things like a first aid kit that I know showed up in every building. It was funny, I had a chance to stop yesterday at the Early Childhood Center, and I was talking with Kaylee that works there. She's like, yeah, that showed up on Monday afternoon. We weren't sure to expect it or where it came from, but it was much appreciated and much needed. And then what was really cool, and some of you may have seen it if you follow Twitter or Principal Carter on, Twitter or Instagram or wherever you posted it, but Community Financial then, all their employees left the showplace, and about 2/3 of them met my co-founder, Jason Smith, at the high school, and the other third went to the middle school and met up with me, and then they broke up into teams and made notes, empowerment notes, like be your best self and things of that nature, and they literally placed them on every single student locker for every student at the middle school and high school. As some of you know, Monday was a day off for the kids as it was a professional development day. So when the kids came in for school on Tuesday morning, every one of them had a personalized note put on their locker, and I just think that was pretty cool. So I again want to thank Community Financial for their generous support, and of course, my co-founder Jason for his work in making that happen, and the principals that let them into the building, and of course you, Ben, for showing up and speaking. So it was pretty
That's
cool.
awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. And that is pretty awesome. I think even as community members and staff, those notes are being seen. I've been over at the high school probably every night for something or another with my kids. And walking down the lockers, it's really, it speaks to me. And I've seen the janitors cleaning, and 2 weeks almost has gone by, and those stickers are still almost on every single locker. So I think it's pretty amazing.
Thank you.
So, thank you. Any other celebrations that we need to share right now? Okay, seeing none, I think that we will just take about a 2 to 3 minute break. I'm sure the students are busy and have things going on in their lives. You are welcome to stay for the rest of our agenda, but we certainly don't want you to be here for the next hour wondering when there's going to be a break, so you and your families can go home and celebrate. So we'll take about a 2 minute break to clear the room, and then we'll get back to our business. So we'll move on to the next item on our agenda. We have the consent agenda. This evening, we have approval of the minutes, regular meeting minutes of October 6th, 2022, and the board work session minutes of October 13th, 2022. We have approval of bills, both all 3 items, the board report, the check register for August 2022, and the purchase card report for July 2022. If I can get a motion for the recommendation? Mrs. Hood?
I move that the Novi Community Schools Board of Education approve the consent items as presented.
Do we have support?
Support.
Recommended by Mrs. Hood and supported by Mrs. Roney. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 6-0. We will move on to reports to the board, and we have 3 items here, so I am going to turn it over to Mr. Micah to introduce our speakers.
Thank you very much. Well, this would be our first data presentation, and so we have our spring assessment data summary from the state of Michigan, and we also have another report that's required by one of our grants, and so I'm gonna turn it over to Mr. Jeremini to provide us the report.
Thank you, Mr. Micah. Good evening, everyone. As I mentioned, I think just after school started, MDE released our spring state assessment scores just at that moment. And so we hadn't at that time had a chance to review them or put them together to share with you. So we're gonna do that tonight. Just a brief overview. One of the things that we're focusing on tonight is a brief summary. So I'm gonna highlight some patterns. I won't go through necessarily every single grade level in this report, but you should have the full report available to you so that you can dig into other grade levels as well. We're gonna look at some trends. We're gonna look at some grade level performances specifically related to the M-STEP, the PSAT, and the SAT. And then we're also gonna highlight some of our opportunities for improvement based on some of our subgroup performances. And highlight just a way that we're kind of going about that. So first, let's start with trends over time. This graph represents the last few years of 3rd through 7th grade. This is ELA performance. You can see that Novi Community School District is on there, as well as Oakland Schools, our county ISD, and the state of Michigan. The years start left to right: 16-17 school year, 17-18 school year, 18-19 school year. We did not have assessments in 1920. I'm sure we all remember why. We had a little pandemic that started at that point, so we didn't have assessments then. And the guidance really is to not look at the 2021 results, because not all students actually took those assessments, so we really wouldn't be comparing apples to apples. So you can see that in most cases, in most grade levels for the ELA, that we are at our pre-pandemic levels or near them, which is great. There's a lot of concern about how well we're doing coming out of the pandemic and the different kinds of learning that occurred and the different kinds of challenges that families and schools faced during that time. We do see here that 6th grade stands out a little bit as an opportunity for us to look at, but we also note that that pattern persists in the county and in the state as well, not yet back to pre-pandemic levels. And I'll hit on that in a little bit. Transitioning to mathematics, again, the same years are displayed here, but this is 3rd through 7th grade M-STEP for math. In this case, what we're seeing is that 5th and 6th grade have not yet returned to pre-pandemic levels. And so that's something that we're going to dig into a bit further. Interesting to consider, though, in terms of mathematics progression and learning, if you think about the grades that these students had most disrupted by the pandemic, our 5th graders were in 3rd and 4th grade, and our 6th graders were in 4th and 5th grade. And those math concepts that are developed there typically are pretty critically important as they progress into really important pre-algebra concepts, including ratios, percentages, fractions, things like that. And as we develop those ideas, that'll set them up for success in algebra. So that's something that we're going to have to reinforce and work on. So, you know, one of the things I know that we in Novi told teachers, and all of us in all of our districts at the time told our teachers as we were coming out of the pandemic, we really have to think about, if this is 6th grade math that we've always traditionally done and these are the concepts, we may have to sort of revisit some concepts that we normally wouldn't have taught. And that's something that we're going to have to continue to do for the next few years as we progress. This next slide is 8th grade and 11th grade ELA. Important to note, these are not M-STEP scores. In 8th grade, students take the PSAT, and in 11th grade, students take the SAT. We have limited data for 8th grade. The change to PSAT was fairly recent, but we see that we're not quite back to our pre-pandemic levels for 8th grade, but we're pretty darn close for 11th grade, so we're making some progress there. What'll be really interesting for us, we have expanded iReady, the use of that diagnostic tool that we've talked about before. We've expanded the use of iReady to 7th, 8th, and 9th grades, and so we're going to be able to do some comparisons right now that we finished the fall diagnostic to see where our kids are at, particularly those 8th graders there on that report, which are now 9th graders. So we're going to really be able to look at our performance there, as well as for our current 8th graders, and see how we can do better. Next slide. There we go. is 8th and 11th grade mathematics. In this area, again, for 8th and 11th grade, it's PSAT and SAT. In this area, we are not caught up to where we were pre-pandemic. We have similar drops across the county and the state, so we have some more work to do here. Something to reflect on is that math instruction, as we typically know it, is not something that translates well to a virtual environment. You really have to teach math very differently in a virtual environment, and that's a hard shift. And so once again, those curriculum shifts are going to be necessary. Really thinking about in Algebra 1, Algebra 2, geometry, for example, pulling concepts from previous grades, identifying where students are at, using that diagnostic tool to see it, and then reinforcing some of those concepts so that you can continue to build understanding. This slide shows our trends in social studies and science. Social studies is not an area that we are back to pre-pandemic levels either. Worth noting, these are now back to M-STEP. So our students in 5th grade, 8th grade, and 11th grade all take an M-STEP in the areas of social studies and science. For our 11th graders in particular, there is a concern as they take their spring assessments about test fatigue. They take a lot of tests in 11th grade. They spend many, many hours testing, multiple days. And for our 11th graders, particularly those thinking about college as their post-secondary option, the perceived value of this test for them is low because it doesn't do anything for them in terms of college admissions. And so we often see this dip, which is probably why you see that similar pattern across the county. And this really is the first time that science was taken, so this will be our baseline that we look at for the future. So we do expect greater improvement this year than we have seen last year and the year prior. We expect to see bigger gains, largely because we've returned in many, many ways to normal. And not only in terms of our academic approach and the things that we're doing, but we have all of our kids in school, but also those social activities are happening. We have our families together in schools, attending events. All of those things affect how students perform in school. And so I think having all those things in place, we can expect to see better improvement this school year. Transitioning to just overall proficiency. So what I showed you in the trend slides was the percentages of students meeting or exceeding proficiency, so considered proficient or advanced proficient. This breaks it down a little bit further. So what you were seeing on those earlier trend slides is the blue. It's the same numbers. This is across the bottom, 3rd through 8th grades. Blue is percentage proficient or advanced proficient. And then red is percentage partially proficient. Yellow is percentage considered not proficient in the spring. Once again, for grades 3 through 7, it's the M-STEP, and for grade 8, it's the PSAT. There are definitely some opportunities for us to better meet the needs of students. Yes, I will fully acknowledge we do very, very well in terms of the percentage of students proficient and advanced proficient, but we definitely have some opportunities to move those students in the yellow and red bands up. And that's some of the work that we're focusing on here, and actually a bit of what the next presentation will focus on. Math, similar trends. You can see, again, grades 3 through 8, percent proficient and advanced in blue, partially proficient in red, and then not proficient in yellow. We have very clear opportunities to move some of those students up, and that's something that we're focused on. And then, of course, 11th grade. On 11th grade, again, that's the SAT. On the left chart, or on the left band, you have the evidence-based reading and writing score. Looking at college readiness benchmarks for that, about 80% of our kids were proficient, and about 20% total of our students partially or not. And then for mathematics, again, we see that dip in mathematics. That's a trend. You see, generally speaking, that schools and students perform better in ELA than they do in math, relatively speaking. But our scores still in math overall are very strong, but we'll continue to work on that. For ELA, we have some opportunities for improvement. Really thinking about for which students we can do better and change how we do things in order to better meet their needs. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we're really focused on samples here. We're looking at a pattern. So I'm just going to look at grade 3 for the 2 subjects. And having looked at this, grade 4, grade 5, grade 6, they follow a similar pattern in terms of the disparities that we see between groups. So we're just going to focus on grade 3 as an example and highlight the areas that we can look at. So for this graph, starting left to right, the blue bar is all students put together. The orange set of bars, the next set of bars, they're sort of different shades of each other or different saturations of each other. That's economic disadvantage, not economic disadvantage, or students with free and reduced lunch. In the purple, the next set of two bands, that's our English learners or not English learners. And then in the red, the last set, that's students with disabilities or students not with disabilities. Again, this is grade 3 English language arts. We see a very large disparity between students with and without disabilities. In that last band, we have about 26% of students, 23% of students considered proficient or advanced proficient, as opposed to the counterpart group where it's significantly higher. We see a moderate gap in performance for our students with economic disadvantage, the orange set of bars, or not economic disadvantage. And this is really a good way to think about comparing these things. Rather than comparing it to the whole, all the students together, we really want to compare when students fall into a certain subgroup versus don't. That gives us a clearer picture of what's happening. But interestingly, much smaller disparity in performance for our students who are English learners in English language arts. So we're doing a pretty darn good job there, especially as compared to the county and the state. Similar chart for mathematics. All the same indicators in terms of what color represents what grouping. We see similar significant disparities for our students with disabilities, as well as for students considered economically disadvantaged. The gap for mathematics is slightly larger than that for ELA. And then we really don't see a disparity for English learners when it comes to math. So also doing very good work there. Maybe makes a little bit more sense. The language is less of a barrier when answering questions about mathematics, even though I'm sure it's still a challenge. So our focus for this year, or one focus for this year, is really seeking higher than anticipated or higher than typical growth for students in these groups. So we're really going to be able to look at two things. One of those is the iReady data, and really looking for these students, because that really provides us a clean growth measure from beginning of the year to the end of the year. Looking for that data to show better growth for those students in these groups than in prior years. And then also for our spring data from these same assessments to look better than it does this year. Other opportunities for improvement as we compare subgroups across race and ethnicity. So I'll just explain this one very quickly. The blue chart, or the blue bar, very first bar is all students. The top half you have English language arts, and the bottom half you have mathematics. Again, it's broken out for Novi Community School District, the county, and the state. For most groups in English language arts up top, we have very similar performance within a margin of error. But our Black or African American students, I would say we have an opportunity there to do much better. So something worth noting, if you look at that group, it's 37 students in 3rd grade across our buildings. That's 37 kids. We know who these kids are. We can identify specifically what these children need and provide what these children need. And this is really an effort thinking about doing things differently. We consider resource allocation, different resources or additional resources. It's really thinking about doing all of those things in a way that meets these kids' needs and all of our kids' needs. So in the next presentation we'll touch on that a little bit, but it's really thinking about what do we have and how can we operate differently in order to better meet these kids' needs. For mathematics, it's very similar to ELA, but with noticeable disparities for our Hispanic students and white students compared to the group. So again, we know who these students are, and we're going to work to make sure that they are successful. Lastly, I just wanted to show you some of the additional information that comes out of these state assessments. Often we consider state assessments not as useful for driving instruction. The data tends to come after the fact, the year is over. But it lets us think about some of our curricular opportunities as opposed to like direct immediate instructional information. So we're going to use iReady as well as other assessments this year to sort of curate specific information about what our kids need. And the next report that I'm going to show you really kind of at a high level gives us that curriculum information. And this information that I'm showing you is for the district. Our buildings can also access this information to sort of reflect on last year curriculum decisions and things that they emphasized. So this report from MDE is, again, I'm just focusing on third grade, is English language arts. And we've got relative strengths and weaknesses. And so these targets that you see listed are reflective of the state standards that we expect students to achieve in those grade levels. It sort of puts them together, it synthesizes them, but each of these targets, you can see pertain to like reading, writing, listening, and the different skills that we expect kids to develop. It's important to emphasize, these are relative. So it doesn't mean that we performed better than everybody else for these strengths. It means that across all of the targets, that we did better in writing target 4 than we did, say, comparatively in writing target 1. So that writing target 4, write full informational texts with appropriate organization, focus, and format, that was a relative strength of ours. Our students did quite well in that compared to how they did with revising brief text, demonstrating narrative techniques appropriate to purpose. So that really helps us think about what experiences did we provide kids and what did we emphasize, and perhaps how can we emphasize some of the things that we saw as relative weaknesses better or more. And then similarly in math, just highlighting here some of those targets that were relative strengths for us and relative weaknesses. At a district level, this is a little bit coarse-grained in terms of its level of detail. We get a lot finer-grained if we look at the building level, although this is good information for us to think about curriculum emphasis, like I said. And that is my summary of the MSTEP and PSAT, SAT data from the spring. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Jeremy Neat. Does anybody have any specific questions? I have a logistical question, just so that I know that I'm reading this appropriately. So when we go back to the different subgroups and we talk about the students with disabilities, are those percentages based on students who took the test with their current resources in place or
Yes.
raw data?
Yes. No,
Okay.
these students take the assessments with their accommodations in place.
Okay, so these are the percentages based on what resources they're currently receiving?
Yeah, so it might be something like extended time, the test might be read aloud, different things like that. They may be offered a scribe depending on their disabilities and what accommodations are identified in their IEP.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Mr. Smith?
What I'm interested in, Mike, and it doesn't have to obviously be provided tonight, but if anyone were to study historical data, like you just presented the summary tonight, I think you'd find our African-American students are lagging consistently. So I appreciate your comment that we know who these 37 students are and we're going to do something differently. I'd just like some examples of what is that going to look like, because it does seem like it's going away, and this isn't new data. So I don't know why we didn't identify something 2 years ago or 4 years ago, or what it's going to look like moving forward. So I'd like to see that at some point.
So my hope is that the next presentation answers that a little bit, but that through the work that we're going to do as a result of this grant that Mr. Micah referred to, we can actually maybe do a presentation at some point about the things that we're trying and the things that we're identifying that are working. It is worth noting, and I didn't include historical trend data broken down by subgroups, but prior to the pandemic, Novi was making good progress in closing gaps. So there was evidence of growth in terms of the percentage of students proficient in these areas, including our Black and African American students. But as we know, the pandemic disrupted a lot, and so it's kind of unfortunately reset things. So things that we were doing were working, but it's not going to be a rapid change.
Okay, I'll wait and see the next presentation. There's resources that the community offers that, I think of the group Passon, that's been helpful, at least historically. I'm sure they had challenges going through COVID as well. But there's other groups and community, members that would be willing to offer some support. I know some of our parents, as you guys know in the audience, are fortunate enough to take their kid to tutor time or to seek private tutoring or to get help, and that's not always an option for everybody. So I just want to explore all that. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Do we have any other comments or questions? Okay. Seeing none, I'll turn this back over to you to introduce the next section, which is the Novi Community School District Mitigating Learning Loss Report.
Well, he was really excited to have two presentations on the same evening, so I'll let Mr. Jeremini kick off. This is a required presentation from the state of Michigan based on the fact that we do accept these 98C grant funds. So this is required for us to be able to continue with that, and so I'll let Mr. Jeremini continue.
Thank you, Mr. Micah. So as part of that grant, as Mr. Micah indicated, we will also be posting this on our website. The requirement in the legislation is that we have to do the presentation to the board prior to October 30th. So this is our opportunity, but the grant application is not due till November 30th, so a little reversed. So mitigating learning loss, the funds for this grant are to be used in order to address students' needs in terms of assessing their needs, providing additional resources to meet their needs, and things like that. So part of this presentation is a data review. Lucky for us, I've just completed that. I do want to get into at some point our iReady diagnostic data, but I just received some of the data that we can't access directly in the system, but that iReady provides us. I just received that today and I wasn't able to put it together for tonight's presentation. We will do a presentation on the iReady data where we actually compare year over year and look at some of those pieces. However, our buildings are actively engaged in their iReady analysis. So first we want to talk about some current support. So what are the things that we do have in place? So we have a very comprehensive multi-tier system of supports. I'm sure you've had presentations and conversations about MTSS before. The idea is that we should be able to meet most students' needs at what we call Tier 1. So 80 to 85% of our kids' needs should be met in Tier 1 core instruction. As we identify students for whom that core instruction is not enough, we think about Tier 2 intervention, which is a little bit small group specialized instruction, additional lessons, supplemental lessons, reteaching, thinking about things like that. And then for students for whom that is not working, we think about Tier 3 intensive intervention, where we're dosing kids 90 minutes a week, really focusing on the individual areas that they struggle in. And Novi has a very robust multi-tier system of support. It's very impressive. And I can say that still as the new guy, because I'm not tooting my own horn. So one of the things that we think about within our multi-tier system of support in that Tier 1 is improving that. So one of the things that we are working on is training all of our teachers and ensuring that they're certified in what's called AVMR, Advantage Math Recovery. This is a way of thinking about math instruction that is more effective and research-based in meeting students' needs. It also includes assessment tools, so it really provides us additional, again, earlier I said coarse versus fine-grained information about what students are struggling with, and allows us to track over time their improvement. That AVMR, including the assessment tools, is something that we would use 98C funds for. We have iReady and some other subject-specific assessments that we use to identify students' needs, for example, Fontes and Pinnell related to reading. We have AVMR for assessment. We would use 98C funds to help cover the cost of those assessments. Individualized lessons within iReady based on students' identified needs. So we talked before about iReady offering the online personalized instruction. So every student, based on their initial diagnostic, is assigned a personalized learning path. And we really follow the research on this. And about 45 minutes a week per subject, so 45 minutes math, 45 minutes ELA. If they engage in those lessons for that amount of time and pass 70% or more of those lessons, that is really the sweet spot for generating growth over the course of the year. So we really emphasize that not only within the models that we have, but also for opportunities for kids to work on stuff at home. I want to highlight that's the sweet spot, and going to 150 minutes a week or 200 minutes a week doesn't have the value added that you would think it does. So there's a reason that they're telling us 45 minutes. We also have what we call in the elementary schools, in the K-4 buildings, win time, what I need or what I need now time, and advisory 30 and 60 at Meadows. This time is used to provide targeted instruction. So an old model of doing this really involved taking kids out of the classroom and then providing instruction, but then they were missing core instruction. Like that, it sounded good at the time, and I'm sure people were well intended, but that doesn't work if they're missing their core instruction. So we have this time designated into the school day where students might receive targeted support They might receive their Tier 3 intervention services, they might receive some Tier 2 instruction, or they might receive some enrichment if they are on or above grade level. This time is really beneficial because it's predictable, it's identified, and we're going to do something a little bit different with it this school year that I'll talk about in a moment. And then I've already addressed Tier 3 instruction with intensive intervention. So looking forward, we want to enhance how we use Win Time A30, A60 to include the intentional grouping of students, which we do, based on their needs, but we want to share our students across teachers. So this is that idea of reallocating resources and thinking differently about how we use this. Now, some of our buildings have piloted this or tried this in the past. This is something that we're doing across all of our K-6 buildings, actually, in different ways. So if we have multiple grade 3 teachers, for example, they're going to identify students' needs using these assessments, and they're going to put them in instructional groups. And they're going to share. So it might be that if I'm a 3rd grade teacher, I have students from the other 3 3rd grade teachers' classes that I'm working with during Win Time, focused on specific skills. So this group of students has been identified as needing support in phonics, for example. So I'm going to work with these students on the phonics lessons that are identified as most appropriate. And then we'll share during that time to best meet kids' needs. That is an enhancement to how we use WIN. So what we want to do is, as we go through that process, as we engage, we want to identify some additional targeted resources that would be beneficial to our students. And that is another place where we will use 98C funds to provide supplemental resources for that targeted instruction based on what kids need so that we can see them grow. Examples of these things you might see like resources like Learning Ally or Ready Writing or Magnetic Reading or different things that might be appropriate. But we don't want to jump ahead and assume that these resources are appropriate. We want to identify first what kids need and then acquire those resources based on that information. So we also have to think about how we're going to measure the impact. We have lots of interim assessments that we use. Overall, the success of the program is going to be measured based on the iReady diagnostics. We take those again in the winter and in the spring. So those will be checkpoints for us to stop and revisit and say, is there anything we need to do differently? Is there something new that we need to add, et cetera? And then, of course, I just did a whole presentation on spring state assessment data. Looking at that state assessment data for spring 2023 will be important. What we're looking for is significant growth for every single one of our students, especially those below their proficiency targets, which we can identify through iReady. When I say significant, we mean by a greater amount than in historical data. So if we grew 10%, then we want to grow 11%, 12%, 13%. If we had 50% of our kids meet their typical growth target, then we want 60% or 80% or 90% of our kids to meet their typical growth target. And typically when we talk about iReady, we really expect for students to meet their typical growth target if we're doing all those things that we've talked about, if the teachers are and if the kids are engaged in those personalized learning paths. But we also strive for them to meet what's called their stretch goal. So that information is very helpful to us to think about, okay, we might meet our typical growth goal, but how do we meet our stretch goal? We also want to see an increase in the percentage of students identified as proficient among our identified subgroups. We just talked about that. Mr. Smith addressed that. That's something that we have to see. And then we want to see decreased discrepancies when comparing the identified subgroups, so as we saw with like race and ethnicity. So how will we review and revise? So following our spring 2023 assessments, if the expected impact is not realized, and some of this is going to be ongoing, but I'm speaking about it in terms of the end of the school year, gathering some feedback from our principals. They are the eyes and ears in the buildings all the time, seeing these things, facilitating these conversations, supporting teachers and engaging in this work to support their students. So we want to know, are we actually implementing this enhanced Win Time A30, A60 with fidelity? How is that going? What changes do we need to make to that structure? We want to gather feedback from our educators regarding the support structures. So is there something that isn't working, or is there a barrier or an obstacle in your way to making this work? And then we want to gather feedback from the educators as well regarding the resources. So teachers have lots of resources at their disposal, without a doubt, but they also want and need more. And so we want to get feedback from them about what those are. Based on this feedback, we want to take advantage of the fact that we have instructional coaches in our district and create some learning opportunities for our staff to help support their classroom practices. Sometimes that's a co-teaching opportunity, sometimes that's a modeling opportunity, and sometimes that's leading professional learning for our staff. Modify our structures as necessary and move forward with those. And then of course, identify those resources, as I said. That's that one. Any questions?
Thank you. Do we have any specific questions for Mr. Jeremini? Mrs. Hood?
Yeah, first of all, I would like to say thank you to Mr. Jeremini. As you've been speaking, I'm thinking about someone starting a new job in a new place with no boss, and then a new boss who's also new. I agree that we have had a substantial, multi-steps of support. We have a robust support, and I'm delighted you recognize that and you said it out loud. And I'm very impressed with your immersion in your job. You just really have embraced it, and it's been wonderful listening to you. You mentioned something about assessment fatigue, I think you used, fatigue. And as we're looking at the schedule, and I don't think this is new, so iReady we use in the winter and spring, and then the M-STEP and PSAT are also in the spring. So how do we, as a organization, how do we care for our students taking all these assessments and kind of get them through it so they're not bound up by this fatigue?
So, a couple of important points. First of all, great question, because I did not even highlight the connection between assessment fatigue for like additional assessments that we give on top of state assessments.
Yeah.
So state assessments are absolutely in the spring. iReady is actually given fall, winter, and spring. And so iReady, what's nice about that is not really a timed assessment. It is something that the students engage in on their Chromebooks, and I've been in the classrooms, and the students, I mean, I may hear contrary reports now that I say this out loud, but students are pretty engaged. Like, I was in one classroom in the middle of iReady testing, and the teacher was actually like, all right, let's take a break, and now we're gonna move on to something else. And this one little boy, he kept going back to his Chromebook, bringing it back to the teacher, and he said, can I please finish my iReady assessment? And she's like, no, it's been this amount of time, like, we're gonna take a break, it's important for us to take breaks. And so our teachers are attending to this for the assessments that we can do that for. State assessments are locked, there's not a lot that we can do, but really, what was I gonna say? Oh, I'm sorry, the interim assessments. So the other assessments that teachers use, like I mentioned, Fontes and Penal and things like that, these are tasks that kids would already engage in anyway. These are things that we would ask students to do. We just have a diagnostic tool associated with it. So it's our way of, like, while you're doing this task, I'm going to measure how you're doing it, as opposed to it's another test, right? So it might be a literacy task or a math test that we would ask kids to do anyway. One thing I didn't mention that I had planned to mention in the presentation, I alluded to it in the M-STEP presentation. We're not gonna address all of this just academically, right? Like, there's a reason that we struggled so much during COVID, and one of the big reasons is that disconnection, that lack of social interaction, that lack of attention to direct mental health services. And so the reason this presentation did not address that is because 98C funds are not for mental health, but we have about 4 other grants that are. And so that's the other thing that we're doing, is really thinking about those things, providing opportunities for students to connect, to get the support that they need, to have a listening ear, a friend. The example of the notes on the lockers that are still there. We have kids at the middle school who now want to do that for other buildings as a result of that experience. So all of these things are going to add to that, and I think address the fatigue piece.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any, Mr. Smith?
I want to echo Kathy's comments, Mike, and compliment you on diving in and getting a handle on it. I just want to encourage you, as you put together your action plans, and like you just acknowledged, some of the funds that we get aren't designated for some of the areas that we know we need to invest in. You have other monies that might be available to be used for that, but again, think outside the box. We're fortunate as a community to have support of our community members and parents and organizations and companies that do everything from come and write the notes that supply money for our robotics programs and our athletic boosters and all that. So, please think outside the box with regards to possible solutions or ways that we can help. I know that it is also great to hear you say publicly that you don't want to toot your own horn. It's nice to hear you tooting the horn of the man that sat in your chair before you arrived, and the work that Ms. Patel and Ms. Hoppenstadt do. for this robust MTSS program that we currently enjoy. And I think it'll just continue to get even better under your tutelage. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Do we have any other comments or questions? Certainly, if anything comes up, I know that you can send it Mr. Jeremini's way, and I'm sure he'll be happy to help and answer those questions. So thank you for all of that information this evening. We're going to move on and shift gears for our final report to the board, and it is the HS4 Door Access Management System report. Mr. Menko.
Thank you. So back in July, we received and approved an award for our district-wide card access system to LaForge LLC. And so they have worked on a product that's called the HS4 card access system. At the time, there were a few questions that came up. And so some of those questions, they're here, the contractor's here, as well as Justin and from McCarthy, and Mr. Degu is here, and we got just a whole big fan club back there. So they're gonna come and they can come on up, but they're gonna provide a brief presentation and be able to answer some questions. One thing is they're coming up and getting set up. At the time, the presentation included the fact that they were gonna be coming back and requesting an approval for the internal card access system. So we approved external card access, and we're now looking at internal. They have provided the quote for your information tonight. And the hope, of course, is that that would be something we would consider for approval at a future board meeting. But we wanted to get it in front of you now so you have time to think about it, ask questions. And so I will go ahead and turn it over to Justin, and they'll be able to answer questions and provide a brief presentation.
All right. Good evening. I know that we are a little pressed on time, so we're going to try and make this as quick as possible. As Mr. Minka had said, we wanted to give you guys an opportunity to kind of get a brief overview of the system and better understanding of how it operates. We've brought tonight with us Ryan Long from the Eisen Group. He helped develop the system, as well as Steve Mariachi and Andy Ney from LaForce, who can speak kind of technical questions about the actual hardware itself, as well as Mike Dragoo, who can answer any questions that you might have regarding decisions made. So going over this was access control. It's the initiative set with the district to go ahead and replace the keyed hardware throughout the district, and also incorporate it into their secured access system throughout the district. So we're going through and trying to do an initiative to replace any keyed hardware throughout the district at the individual schools, as well as the individual buildings within the district, to all go into a keyless access system. How it functions, we have Ryan Long here from Eisen Group to better explain that. Afterwards, we'll have a Q&A session, followed by an implementation timeline and cost amendments and how this is working and how we're gonna actually implement this throughout the school district, and show you a little bit of the timeline. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ryan, so he can kind of speak to the software itself.
Hello guys, thank you for having me tonight. My name is Ryan Long with the Eisen Group. I represent HS4 in the state of Michigan. So what is HS4? HS4 is a pretty robust access control system, and what we do better than most people in the industry is a complete key replacement, and that's what we're doing for the district. The highlights of our product: all the openings in an entire building, an entire campus can be networked together using multiple types of platforms, either offline, wireless, or wired. Access control is not just available on readers and locks, but multiple other types of products, as well as lockers, cabinets, and padlocks as well, indoor and outdoor. You can use multiple types of credentials, including phones. You'll see that in just a second. You can remotely lock and unlock openings, whether they're either wired or wireless, throughout the entire district from one or multiple locations. The server-based software can manage 65,000 openings and 4 million users with no annual licensing fees or costs of any sort that are ongoing. Here's kind of the Salto virtual network. Like, we know what wired and wireless networks are. This is actually a standalone network where we can actually transfer data throughout the district using a card from the credential or the classroom lock into the server without any wires or wireless platform. BLE, just in mobile app solution, this is actual credential on your phone. So instead of having a card or a fob, this is actually could be on your Apple device or your Android device and use it from your phone. This is the wide body lock. This is the lock you'll be seeing mostly throughout the district. It comes in two different functions, either cylindrical or mortise, multiple lever designs, and takes 3 AA batteries to perform. This is kind of the other lock for your exit devices around the district, and the padlocks that we could use on the exterior of the building as well. So in theory, we could go anywhere throughout the district and get away from physical keys, and that is the district's goal. Pretty much on a quick run through, that's pretty much it on the quick run through of the system. Any questions on that?
Mr. Mena?
You mentioned batteries, so that brings up an obvious question that I probably don't even have to ask, right? But how often do they have to be replaced, and how much work have you seen that takes by somebody, a group of people, and who's normally responsible for changing those out?
Right, so it depends on the use of the doors themselves and how they're programmed. So what we did mostly in the district is you're gonna see an offline lock on some of the classrooms, and they go about 2 years for the batteries. They are gonna work on getting pretty much an annual or every other year maintenance plan that during the summer those are gonna get replaced. This also in the system, as batteries get low, think you have 4,000 openings of that door as it's telling you every day in the system or sending emails or text messages, however you guys want them received, that battery is getting low. So there'll be tons of opportunity as that door's batteries are running low that you will have multiple alerts. So you'll be able to address that as they come up, and you wouldn't really have to do it all at once if you didn't want.
In case of some sort of a network outage, what sort of an override do you have?
Well, actually, when a network override, what we do really well is it reverts to that SVN system. So it actually starts operating manually by itself. You could still use your card, it still records all the audits, and then when this network comes back online, when you swipe your card at a wired reader, it sends all the data back to your server, so it records all that during an outage. So there will really be no time where it's off, where it's not recording or doing its job.
So, well, I mean, I guess I don't want to get into the security details
Correct.
here, but at a high level, let's say, a lock is ready to receive a card, and that card is either going to have access to that particular lock or not have a particular lock.
Yep.
How does that lock know whether or not that card should allow entry,
Yep.
or whether that lock should allow entry to that card if it's offline from the network
The
at the
great
time?
part about our system, real quickly, is all that data is actually stored on the card itself. It's a smart card.
Okay. All right.
Thank you. Any other questions? Mrs. Hood?
I had a lot of questions. When I first saw this, I saw it's 1.6 million, and I thought, oh, we must be getting new doors. We're not getting new doors, we're getting new locks for the doors, which is fine. So along Mr. Mena's path of questions, so I saw that these are wire-free installations, because I wondered the same thing, if who maintain, or not who, but when we maintain the AA batteries in all of these locks, what kind of maintenance is that? But in one of the slides, it says that there is a optional key override. Do we have plans for any key overrides, actual keys?
That was actually, that plan was actually, how that's working is your security consultant has made those decisions. So, right now, no.
Okay, and I didn't realize that that our security consultant had concluded that we were going to be a key-free district. So that was, I either missed it in the presentation or that is news to me. I did have a question about the 52 lockdown buttons that are in the thing, but maybe that is too,
I don't think so.
what's the word I want, specific for this meeting. So I think you answered my other ones. Thank you.
Okay. Any others?
Mr. Cook?
How long did you say it takes to change out the batteries?
Actually, in my office, I changed it out today. It took about a minute.
Took a minute and
It's one screw.
just one screw? Okay, so we're talking 10 hours worth of time, almost, 2,500. You got manpower to cover that, Mike? Because, you know, and if the batteries die prior to changing, what's the recovery? Because I've been stuck outside a hotel room with one of those and, with two very young kids crying because they couldn't go to bed and
too.
waited 4 hours for them to.
Yeah, for sure.
Real
We have,
thumbs up.
well, there, I don't wanna get into like the security aspects of overriding locks, but there's multiple ways we could do it. We'll get you.
It also sounded like the way your system operates is whether it was weekly or monthly, Mike and his team could hit a button and see the 22 locks that are at 20% capacity. And my assumption, which I hate assuming anything, is that you would develop some type of policy or procedure where as soon as any lock hit a certain percentage of low battery, that would be identified for replacement, and the other 90% of the doors would be just fine because they have less use than blah, blah, blah. Is that
We could actually, they can run a report.
perfect?
Mrs. Wood?
Just one more question about the batteries, sorry. I assume, when you just said it took you 1 minute to replace the batteries on your door, I assume that these locks won't let somebody who doesn't have an electronic key take a battery out.
Correct. You have to be on the inside, the secure side.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you for being here, I really appreciate it.
problem.
I know we
Thank
had
you,
this
guys.
conversation back in July, and there was a lot of questions at this board table, so it's great to have the expert here, and we appreciate your time this evening.
All right, so I just want to run through real quick about how the program was established. We did use Meadows out here as the basis of design on there, and the rest of the district is kind of following suit. So as we're bringing more of these construction projects online, the hardware itself is being housed within the construction itself and updated as we're turning these projects over. Going on to the budget unveiling, we had the overall budget established through unit prices. We got an award through the exterior door hardware for $291,000. And as you guys have today, we put in there an amendment for doing the interior hardware for both the high school and ECEC. And at the moment, we are currently working on the transportation building, ESB building, and maintenance building, along with the middle school, to develop pricing for that as well. Our trial installation area has been at the Roar building. We have completed both the exterior and interior retrofit in both these, inside this building throughout, and have successfully integrated it also into the security hardware, or the security access system within the building. So as we're going through these buildings, these systems in each of the individual buildings will actually also be incorporated into the card access system. Just kind of going through the quantities, which we already know, and then the timeline. So as far as the interior hardware installation, giving you a brief overview of it, essentially we'll be going into late spring, starting at the early childhood. And this is gonna carry over into the spring of '24, so spring of '23 into '24 to get through the entire district. And starting off with the early childhood and high school, beginning next summer. This will also overlap with the new building over at Meadows. As far as the exterior hardware, this too will also be taking place in the spring, starting with the early childhood and are working our way through. The high school, IDC, Meadows, and so on and so forth, till we get through all the buildings, somewhere around midsummer. Do you guys have any questions as far as the budget and timeline of the turnover of this?
Anybody have any questions specific for Justin tonight?
Okay.
Okay, thank you for being here. Certainly, if there's any additional questions by the board, they can send them through to Mr. Meinka, and he will get the answers for you moving forward. And then this will potentially come back to the board for action at a future meeting, correct?
If I can give you some consideration, please, Ben, as you think about the policy and procedure, it, of course, doesn't make any sense to spend any money on this system and then have a teacher put a rock under a door, which I think is kind of what happened at Uvalde. Or no, somewhere?
that was a
Different one?
urban legend.
Oh, okay. So I just want to make sure that whatever our policies or
Yeah.
procedures are, that there's not, you know, because I've seen at the high school, people hold the door open or they'll put something under there and, you know, so I just,
Absolutely.
All right.
That's been a focus this year for us.
okay, good.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Thank you for being here, fan club. We appreciate all the work you do. We will move on to our first opportunity, our only opportunity for comments from the audience. If someone walked in late and they weren't able to fill out a green card and they'd like to make a comment this evening, Sheila has the green cards in the back and she will get them up here to Mr. Cook. It looks like he has one up here. The board respectfully requests that any individual wishing to speak to the board provide their name, address, and any organization they represent. Keep their comments to the allotted time, which tonight we put 4 minutes. We only have one speaker, but as you know, we have a really robust agenda and we have a lot going on, including a closed session for security at the end of it. So refrain from directing comments to the individual members of the board, district employees, and members of the audience. Mr. Cook.
Mr. Mitchner?
Hi, Jason Mitchner. So members of the board, first, it was really good to see the policy and governance committee meet, capital projects, and also the DEI committee meet in the last couple of weeks. It was very encouraging to see the work and the discussions going on. So towards the data that Mr. Jeremini shared, I think first I wanted to thank the district for putting together the data and also allowing the public to see the breakdown of the data and how it affects the different subgroups. I think as far as our Black Novi students, I would strongly encourage the board to figure out a course of action how to address that more in the immediate time frame and less as a study. So using the DEI committee meeting that's coming up in November to take some action, look at the data, come up with a plan, and then give a report out for the board meeting next and let the public know what you're doing. Because as mentioned earlier by a board member, it is not a new trend. It is not a trend that happened with COVID. It's a long-term existing trend. And I think the quicker we can address it, the quicker we can resolve it. And it's a point of promise for the district, because if Novi Community School District can figure this out, we can be a leader not just in the state but in the nation. And I would suggest we take a look at it at a very data-driven approach. It's either going to be something we're doing inside Novi, where obviously there are certain groups of students that are excelling. So in general, either the practices we're doing are working, they're just not being equally applied to that group of students, and we have to figure out why. And that could be something that doesn't show up in the data. It could be an interpersonal type thing or a situation that data doesn't capture that we'll need the board to work with the administrators to figure out what policies or procedures, what you can do at a board level to help the district so that everybody can have access to that kind of education. Maybe down to the individual personal level, figure out what's going on. Or it's something that's happening outside of the district where that group is not able to take advantage of other opportunities that the other groups are. And that means that the district needs to work harder to address those needs inside. So with something that the district is doing that is lacking, and other groups are able to compensate for it outside of Novi School, and that's why they're able to have an achievement that far outpaces the Black Novi students, because I think in no way the data has any reflection on any individuals or groups as far as their capabilities or their desire to have a better education or achieve. I think it's something that we need to be doing better either internally or where we're not equally giving access to those groups, or it's something that we're lacking in general, but externally other groups are able to find a way to compensate. Either way, if we can solve it, it will make our school district better for everyone. So I really hope that you guys will act now as opposed to later, figure out how to address it in your committees, and I would love to hear what, maybe as soon as the next board meeting, what steps you're taking, even if you don't know what the actual solution is, what you've looked at, what you're trying, what you're thinking about doing. That'd be great for the community to get that feedback, as opposed to having to wait until the next spring assessment when Mr. Jeremy gives the data and we assess if we've closed the gap at all. I'd love to see progress led by the board and the administration to see what we're doing. And then a comment on the committee, since we're now going to a admin versus committee of the whole that the public has access to. That's going to be even more important to see the individual committees have report outs at the board level, so the community knows what you're working on, and then they can provide their feedback maybe in the committees of the whole or at the board level meeting, so that we can work together, school with community, to elevate our whole district. And then just lastly, just curious for the door monitoring thing. It'd be interesting to know, like I know a lot of home security systems, you can tell what entryways are closed or not. It'd be interesting if we can do that with our locks as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mishner.
That's it.
Okay, that looks like all of the public comment we have for this evening. We'll move on in our agenda to donations. We have 2 items this evening. We will start with orchestra.
So the Novi High School Orchestra Boosters would like to give a gift, and this is kind of unique. They are actually asking for Miss Brittany Harris, to compose a composition, to write a piece of music that our students would actually play. And so they are donating the cost to commission that for $2,700, and they are just having that here for your approval this evening.
Thank you. If I can get a motion for the recommendation?
I think there's one recommendation for both, or are you gonna split those?
They're separate.
Okay,
Well, they're listed separately, so we'll split them.
okay.
Ms. Hood?
I move that the Novi Community Schools Board of Education accept the donation as presented.
Support?
With appreciation and thanks.
Recommended by Mrs. Hood and supported by Mr. Mena. Any comments or conversation surrounding this? Yes, please.
I didn't realize that we have gotten to the 10th graduating class of the high school orchestra program. I was thrilled to hear that. I remember when it started, and it didn't seem that long ago.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Great. Mrs. Roney?
All I can say is I can't wait to hear it play.
For sure. All righty. Seeing no other comments, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries 6-0. Our second donation is Novi Woods.
So Novi Woods, as you know, in partnership with NEF and the PTO, installed what was called the Novi Woods Nest, which is kind of an amphitheater style. I know Mrs. Roney had the opportunity to visit at its christening. What I will say is that we are looking at that space, and the PTO realized that they really were hoping for a sunshade. At different points in the day, the sun can be in the students' eyes and so on and so forth. So the PTO has embarked on a plan where they have donated $3,500 for initial startup, and they will hope to raise $14,000 to help to install the sunshade in the Novi Woods Nest Learning Area over the year. That's there for your approval.
Thank you. If I can get a motion for the recommendation, Mrs. Roney?
That the Novi Community School Board of Education accept the donation as presented with appreciation and thanks.
Do we have support?
I'll support.
Recommended by Mrs. Roney and supported by Mr. Smith. Any comments or questions regarding this donation? No? Okay.
It's just a cool space. I don't know if you guys have gotten over there or not, but it does need like the big sail thing to go over it, because otherwise those little kiddos are gonna get fried at certain times of the year.
Except for today when it was snowing.
Yeah.
Alrighty. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries 6-0. We'll move on to our 2 action items, the first one being the personnel report. Mr. Meinka.
I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Carino for the personnel report.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Menka. Tonight, we just have 2 resignations. Teresa Hrybar is resigning as literacy specialist at Orchard Hills, and Taylor Morgan is resigning as a science teacher from Novi Middle School.
Thank you, Dr. Carino. If I may get a motion for the recommendation? Mr. Mena?
I move that we accept the personnel report as presented.
Do we have support?
Support.
Recommended by Mr. Mena and supported by Mrs. Roney. Do we have any questions or comments on tonight's personnel report? Okay. Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries 6-0. We'll move on to our second action item, which is the approval of the SEAB co-chairs. Mr. Meinka.
Thank you. So we, as you know, at our last board meeting had suggested a process for, reconstituting the SEAB board. We had a surprise, in our experience. We were thinking we would probably have a reasonable number, but we actually had 77 applicants to be participating on the board. We gathered district leadership, building leadership, as well as teacher leadership to try and make decisions on the applications that were presented. And what we determined is that we did not allocate enough time to really make thoughtful decisions about that. But one of the things in the process and also in the law, based on section 107 of the revised school code, is that the district does need to appoint co-chairs. And so in our process that you've approved, we are bringing them forward this evening, and I'll talk about that in a second. A couple updates on this before you vote on the co-chairs. We have not yet had any applicants for the sex education supervisor. It's a position that we're looking to recruit, and so Mr. Geremini is working on that along with Dr. Carino, but it's a challenging role to fill, and so we're looking at the best fit there and how we could maybe package it a little bit differently. But that's something that we are looking into. Historically, we in Novi have had the sex ed supervisor being one of the co-chairs, but that is not required by the law. And one of the things that, as you probably realize, a group this size, which is gonna be around 26 people, that's gonna be a difficult group to facilitate potentially, especially considering some of the topics that I'm sure will be discussed. And so, as we think about our co-chairs, we were looking at the people who had volunteered out of the 77 who would possibly be willing to co-chair. And our committee decided that we would recommend to you Mr. Geremini as one of our co-chairs, one of our staff members. The law requires that one of the co-chairs also be a parent in the district, and so we have recommended to you this evening Emily Aluya. Emily is a parent from Novi Woods as well as from Novi Meadows, and so we are hoping that the two of them together would be able to co-facilitate. And then what we're doing is we're going to bring our same team back to look at the applications and really dive into making sure that we're able to constitute a group that we think would be very collaborative and be able to meet the needs of our students and districts. So the first step in the process, which we wanted to hit tonight, was to approve Ms. Emily Aluya and Mr. Geremini as our co-chairs, and then we will bring, for informational purposes in the future, an opportunity to actually constitute our full board once we've had opportunities to reach out to them and have further conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Meinka. So we have before us a resolution. If someone would like to make the motion and read I would say probably the entire resolution, that would be helpful. Mrs. Hood?
Put my glasses on. Whereas section 107(5) of the revised school code states that the board of a school district shall appoint 2 co-chairs for the advisory board, at least one of whom is a parent of a child attending a school operated by the school district. Now let it be known that Superintendent Micah is recommending the involvement of 2 co-chairs in the selection of the Sex Education Advisory Board members and allowing them the time to do their due diligence in this membership selection. Therefore, be it resolved that the Novi Board of Education approves Mr. Mike Geremini and Emily Aluya as the 2 co-chairs of the Sex Education Advisory Board.
Thank you, Mrs. Hood. Do we have support?
Support.
Supported, recommended by Mrs. Hood and supported by Mr. Mena. Do we have any comments or questions specific to the 2 co-chairs?
Can I just get reminded, who's on the committee or who's the group that's picking these people? Is it just you?
No, we have a team of building administrators, district administrators, and teachers.
I just didn't know. I didn't know if that list is public or, what criteria they use to pick who they picked. I don't know if that's.
It's based on the application, so, people had a series of questions that they
Right.
completed. So all
Okay.
77 people have listed kind of their thoughts and vision for the group, and we're trying to the team's goal is to try and constitute a group that would be able to collaborate together and also represents a diversity of viewpoints in our community.
Obviously, you and Mike feel comfortable with that process and how you guys came up with Emily's name?
Yes,
Okay,
to this
great.
point.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Do we have any other specific questions regarding the two co-chairs at this moment?
I would just like to thank them for stepping forward to doing this, because it is not going to be a small task. But it's something very much needed, so.
Thank you, Mrs. Roney. All right, seeing no other questions or comments, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 6-0. We have two items on our information and discussion this evening. One is the draft board calendar and committee schedule. Mr. Menka.
At our last work session, we had the opportunity to review a couple different thoughts on the intentionality of our committee meetings as well as our board meetings and the frequency of such. As we talked about, obviously, right now, we have a lot going on in the district. We're doing a lot of things in kicking off with our new cabinet and everything else. So there's need for the multiple meetings. What is there before you as just a consideration? We're not approving anything tonight, but we thought we would start by kicking the ball, down the field, so to speak, to use the analogy, and let you start to weigh in on what that might look and feel like as a calendar. We certainly can make changes to this. This is simply for information and discussion, but so that anyone that didn't have the opportunity to participate in the work session, our committees have been essentially, they've been public, open meetings, yet they've also had only 3 members attending. And so one of the things that we're trying to do, and you as a board decided at the work session, was to say, we like the transparency of having committees that the public can attend on a regular basis. But there's also opportunities that sometimes are missed when, say, there needs to be a more careful conversation that's had. And so what the board opted to look at was somewhat of a hybrid approach to how we do committee work. So administrative board committees, which would be the members of the committee that are selected, would work with no more than 3 board members. Those would not be open to the public, but they would also be unable to deliberate because that work would need to be shared out at a board meeting, at an open board meeting. But then we would also have committee of the whole meetings where the members of that committee would then have an open meeting in which any of members of the board could attend. And we have started by placing those dates there on the calendar for you to review, which are representative of the current times that you're meeting in your current committee. So wanted to have that there for you to review. You can think about it, certainly keep us posted, and then obviously if you have questions tonight about any of those, you can let us know. But these are just kind of a suggested starting point after the conversation we had last week.
Thank you, Mr. Menka. Does anybody, Mr. Mena, do you have any specific questions to the template?
We don't have schedules for a lot of the events that happen going out in 2023, but August 24th is a potential conflict. We do have athletic events that start before school does. And I think the first 2 football games are usually a Thursday. And of course, it's not just football, but it's band, it's dance, it's pom, it's a whole bunch of folks that are involved in
Sure.
those. So just wanted to make sure that we put a star next to that one as a potential change.
Good point.
Thank you, Mr. Mena. And as Mr. Menka pointed out, hopefully you'll be able to take your calendars and look through this, and this is kind of a template. If there's anything that really jumps out at you, certainly we're taking notes, and Sheila's going to be keeping track of the school district calendar. Does anyone have any specific questions to the format or comments regarding what we discussed at the organizational meeting, the previous organizational meeting, and kind of where we're at, where we've landed with this?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I'm looking forward to seeing kind of how it works out, and I'm sure at some point, when we're deep into the process, we can kind of maybe reassess and see if it's working out for everybody.
Yeah. Certainly.
Any other questions? Since this is information and discussion, certainly you don't have to have all your questions known right here. You can send them over to myself and/or Mr. Menka, and we'll get answers for you. And this will come back to the board at a future board meeting. Okay, we're going to move on to Troon policy presentation. Mr. Menka.
So at our previous governance and policy committees, we've had, opportunities to hear from Troon Law about their policy service. I don't want to jump ahead of your report, so I don't know, feel free, Mr. Smith, to jump in. What I will say is that we asked Ms. Starlin to be here from Troon, to provide us with some information about the policy service that Troon provides. We've looked at the 3 primary policy providers in the state, which represents our current policy, Miller-Johnson, as well as the Neola framework, which is a group that Mr. Smith will talk about. We heard from them this past week, and then Troon. So these are kind of the 3 policy providers in the state. And so she's gonna talk a little bit about their policy, what they offer briefly, and then answer any questions you might have. I think she's got some sample policies to share. But this is for information and discussion, but a future board meeting would be the request for the board to consider engaging with Troon Law and their policy service. And that process would be somewhat lengthy, and it would take some time, but it would involve all of you being able to review the policies and see what those are like. So, Ms. Starlin, I'll turn it over to you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me tonight. I do have some folders. Some of you
Thank you.
have seen this before, but never have enough folders. There you go.
Thank you.
Of course. So in the folder, there's just some information about the policy service. I know I shared with the policy committee, this is not something that our firm entered into lightly. There was certainly a lot of heartburn involved in deciding to get into policies because we recognized that it would be a decades-long commitment and a significant commitment. But at the end of the day, we decided that there was a need that our clients had, and that's what we're there for, is to meet our clients' needs. As of today, we have 90 school districts across the state who are policy service subscribers. And the feedback we've gotten so far has been positive. We do always take feedback from clients, so I know there has been times that clients have requested policies on certain topics. And we've evaluated them and said this looks like something that would fit in with our whole policy service, so then all of our subscribers get the benefit of having access to that policy. In your folder on the right-hand side, you can see the base table of contents for the policy service. The policy manual itself is $7,000, and that includes all of the policies that are included on that list. Some are optional, and some have optional provisions within them. Now, you can use the policy service as a standalone policy set. A lot of our clients, though, wanted more. They want forms, they want sample resolutions, they want administrative guidelines that sort of get into the details of how they're going to do things. So the second item in the right-hand side of your folder is the table of contents for the administrative guidelines and forms. That is, the cost for that is $4,000. Now again, you can just have the policy service. It's designed to be a standalone service, but I think almost all of our clients have elected to do the administrative guidelines and forms. Then in the folder as well, there are a couple of sample policies. The 2000 series bylaws policy, board member conflict of interest, the student anti-bullying policy, the administrative guideline for student health and safety do not resuscitate orders, which comes from state law, and then a sample complaint form in the back there. We do annual updates. Well, our goal is annual updates. When the law changes, sometimes we have to push out an update more frequently than annually to ensure our clients are in compliance with the law. We do have everything up once you're a subscriber. You log into our website, there's a portal, you can always find the most up-to-date version of the policy manual, of all of the administrative guidelines and forms, and then the updates, and they're all available there. As well as instructions and some videos about how to implement them. As Mr. Manka mentioned, there is an undertaking here. It's not just you purchase it and you post it on your website. You have to go through and customize it for your district, because every district operates a little bit differently and every district has different needs. And then if there are any policies within that service that you say, you know, we want to tweak this because of something that we do here in Novi that maybe is not common among other districts, or maybe there's a historical practice that we have within our district that a lot of other districts don't have, we can always work that into the series. So I don't know if anyone has any questions. I know you guys do have a full agenda, so I don't want to keep you long, but happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you. Any specific questions? Mr. Mena?
The process for getting from what we have now to your service, you do mention that, you know, there's some customization involved, because I know I've been on the policy committee forever, and we've gone through and modified some of our own policies based on situations that we've had here within the district. So at some point, we have to go and start looking at those one by one to see how they map to what you have, right? Do you work with us on those? Do you come to the meetings, or is that something that we work on ourselves?
That'd be something that you guys do yourselves, but we're always available to answer questions. So if you call and say, hey, we have this particular practice, is this covered in the policy service somewhere? Is there a policy, is there an AG? One of us can find the answer to that question, but in terms of making the selections within the service and then comparing it to what you have now, that would be something that is done usually with a small group within the district.
And as far as your administrative guidelines, if we move forward and purchase those, can you explain again exactly how you would describe those?
Yeah, so it's, they're not, most of them are not policies. The policies are, this is the law of our district. The administrative guidelines are tools to help implement the law. So for example, the student discipline policy, it's actually a series of 4 or 5 policies depending on what you choose. The policies themselves describe the rules about student discipline, suspension and expulsion, the state mandated suspension and expulsion provisions, due process, suspensions and expulsions for students with disabilities, etc. The administrative guidelines and forms includes sample board agenda language, meeting minute language to use at a student discipline hearing, notice letters that go to the parents notifying somebody that, you know, your student will be coming before the board or a committee for suspension or expulsion, board resolutions if it's a board level hearing, letters following the discipline hearing, and then the reinstatement process. So under state law, a student can apply for reinstatement, so appointing a reinstatement committee, and then sample letters notifying the family of the outcome. So I think there's about 18 different forms. That's what we call our administrative guidelines and forms.
Thank you.
No problem.
Any other questions? Thank
I
you.
just would encourage any of you, if you have any questions or any clarification, to get it out. I want to thank Ms. Starlin, who spent the morning and afternoon up in Traverse City this morning. Obviously drove back down to answer any questions or clarify anything that we have. For example, why are we even considering looking at another firm versus keeping what we have? So now would be a good time to get it out if you have anything like that.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Alrighty, next we have 2 committee reports. The first one is the DEI committee. Our chair, Mrs. Murphy, is not here, so Mr. Micah has taken the minutes and he's going to give us a brief summary of what was discussed.
Certainly, we had our first DEI committee of the year. In attendance was Ms. Ruskin, Ms. Murphy, Ms. Hood, myself, and Mr. Jeremini, as well as Ms. Holly. And so this was our first meeting with our new team, and it was kind of our intention to establish the roles and the kind of charter work of this committee, as well as kind of aligning the work that's been done and bringing us up to speed on where that has happened. We did talk about the media center audit and the results and the finding. So we talked about not only what they were able to find, but also comparing that to other types of library services and how maybe the school library service differs from, say, the Novi Public Library. And so we're going to be asking some further questions of Julie Farkas and talking about how they've also looked at their selection process and how that might be similar to us. And so looking at, how books are selected and the process for doing so is something that came out of that conversation, and that was presented previously, but it was good to kind of refresh ourselves about that. We also talked about the 2022 school climate survey that students took, and we really looked at and dug into the data around what students had stated. So the material was last presented at the previous curriculum committee, but we brought that back so that everybody could have an understanding of what those data points were. And so looking at some, strengths as well as some areas of weakness or opportunities and the ways that students felt connected to adults, other peers, different subgroups of students and how they responded. And so there's a lot of data there. I encourage everyone to take a look at the school climate survey results. And so that was a real big part of our work. We also talked about the work that the ongoing district DEI committee is doing. And so from the committee, we talked about having a representative from the district DEI committee come to the board DEI committee to really kind of update on some of the work that's being done. We talked a lot about some significant work from all aspects of the district, from things happening even in our transportation department around DEI to things that are happening in classrooms. And our DEI committee is excited to, we've got a shell of our diversity calendar that we're hoping to push out this month, as previously stated. And a presentation of this work will be ready for our next DEI committee, but hopefully this month we'll be able to have, we do have it in a digital format, but we're excited to push that out for other people to kind of understand what this calendar looks like. It really identifies cultural and religious holidays from a variety of different standpoints from the students that we serve. So some really good starting points and places for us to build. And we had one comment from the audience, I believe, Mr. Mishner, and that concluded our meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Meinke. We'll move on to our next committee report, which is Government and Policy Committee. Mr. Smith.
We've met a couple of different times. I would include Trustee Cook and Trustee Mena in the conversation as well as they've sat on the committee longer than I have. So if I missed something, gentlemen, or if there's something you want to add, or even Trustee Hood, who's been on that committee. But the bottom line is when we assessed our current policy manual and what we refer to now as administrative, what do we call them? ARs? Regulations, right, versus the way that Trude refers to it as policies and that administrative guidelines. There's gaps. And we see some of the gaps as evidenced in Mr. Giarmini's report this last week or last couple of weeks we saw about field trips, things of that nature. But that's not the only area that we've seen where we could have had something a little bit tighter in there. What that led us to conclude was, hey, it might be a good time for us to review our entire policy manual and ensure a couple of things. One is that we're following our state guidelines in that we're reviewing our policy guidelines on a regular and consistent basis, and then that we're not exposing ourselves to any unnecessary risk because we don't currently have a policy in place that might address a certain area. As everybody knows, the last couple of years have been brought some different and unique things to light that I think we could address or do a better job addressing. When we looked at our administrative regulations, what we also noticed was there could be an appearance or an argument made that within our regulations or recommendations, we have policy comments versus having the policy guideline really just be full of policy and the administrative guidelines or the administrative recommendations really be more cut and dry and not voicing policy within a guideline or a recommendation. One of the things that we observed with what Troon offers is in my opinion, a more user-friendly administrative guideline section that would really function as a standalone with regards to different reports or forms that a parent or a teacher or we as a board member could use or refer somebody to if they were looking for clarification on an individual policy. As you all know, we used to get our policy manual through Neola, and then we made the switch and went to Lusk Albertson, which is now Miller Johnson, right? And then, not to make light of it, but I was reminded as we talked about it at the committee level of that, Goldilocks story where one seemed like it was too big and one seemed like it maybe was too small, and it seemed like the Troon presentation might be just right with regards to capturing a thorough encompassing of what policies we need to have, allowing us to customize the policies that we choose we would need to customize. And I do want to report to all of you, I know Bobby's not here, but it will involve some work on all of our behalf over the next 3 to 6 months, where we'll take that book out and we'll actually take a red pencil or whatever you want to use and go through it and decide what do we want to personalize to Novi, what are we okay with. But it's my hope and expectation that by the end of, let's say, Q1 of 2023, we would emerge as a board with a complete and thorough and updated policy guideline manual with a set of administrative guidelines that would be current, following the letter of the law in every extent, and be, I think, more user-friendly and comprehensive. The presentation that we had from Troon, I know the people that were there for the actual presentation from not just Ms. Starlin, but another individual from Troon Law Firm, was, as you would expect, positive and comprehensive. Trustee Cook had suggested that we also invite Miller Johnson back in to give us their view on what it might look like if we retain them to update or refresh what we currently have in place. They declined. We also then reached out to Neola. They sent a representative that we met with this past Monday, and we had obviously left Neola for a certain number of reasons, and at least the three of us agreed to bring the recommendation forward to you as a board that we consider moving forward in the direction of Troon, which obviously is a law firm that we employ in other areas. So the pricing is favorable. There's a familiarity with us and them. Superintendent Meinke has worked with that group at a previous district and had a positive experience. So we thought it would make sense to have Jennifer come tonight and answer any questions, give us all at least a little bit of a taste of what they would be doing. And that's what we all have in front of us. So, anything you guys want to add?
Thank you, Mr. Smith, and
Well,
go ahead.
I will add, I do have a hard copy of their entire policy manual and the administrative guidelines. I've been kind of perusing through that on occasion here. If any other board member would like to see those as more comprehensive, just let me know and I will share them with them.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. Anything else? Thank you, Mr. Smith, for leading that committee and for the due diligence of the committee. I know it's a lot of work, but bringing all that forward to the entire board to make sure we get our policies and our ARs or AGs, whatever we're going to call them, will help with the work that we do here in the district. So appreciate that. We're going to move on to the superintendent's report. Mr. Meinke?
I'm going to go as quickly as I can here. We had this past week during our board work session, the CPAC Safety Fair, which is our Special Education Parent Advisory Committee, was an amazing turnout. Dr. Carino and Mr. Geremini had the opportunity to attend while we were in our session, but it was a partnership with the Novi Police, the district, as well as the Novi Fire Departments and our Special Education Parent Advisory Committee. And basically it was talking a lot about how to keep our sensitive citizens safe. And we had over 50 students register with the Novi Police, and it was a really great experience for everybody. They had treats and giveaways, and everybody was smiling, and all the pictures I saw were amazing. So that was a great opportunity, and we really appreciate our parent members of CPAC and, Ms. Patel and her leadership there as well. I also had the opportunity to attend the Passon Group meeting, their first meeting of the year. They're still alive and well. They're, kind of getting back together after COVID, and that was a really nice opportunity to meet a number of our African-American families. They're having an opportunity to, they're doing a lot of things. They have a lot of ideas, and so it's important for us as a community to, continue to support them, and that was a nice meeting to attend this past week. Also went to Fanfare, which was incredible, seeing the number of bands that came here to Novi, seeing our stadium full of people there to watch the bands. I had the opportunity with Principal Carter to present awards to the winners, and also hear our incredible Wildcat Marching Band. They did a fantastic job, but what an incredible experience, and something that everybody should take in at some point. Also, Mr. Cook mentioned this earlier, but choir and orchestra had their first concert this past week, and really amazing seeing all of the kids back in action. Fall sports are starting to wind down, sadly. It seems like they just started, but our teams are preparing for state tournaments, and some have already moved forward. Our tennis team did finish 4th in the state for Division I in Michigan, which is awesome. And I would also just shift gears and say I appreciate all of your attention and work at the board work session. I think it was an important meeting to kind of establish some parameters for all of us so that we can all kind of work together. I encourage all of you as you're sending me those aspirational statements, so I can come back to that at a future board meeting. One thing coming out of there is that the November 10th work session, as you had asked me to check into, Collins and Blaha, the legal team that developed the superintendent framework that we discussed at that meeting, is available for the evaluation training on the 10th. I have reached out to the current candidates who are running for the board and just made them aware of the fact that we do have this date, so that, if successfully elected or not, it's an open meeting, they could attend and, hear the training, and at least have the training provided as well. Lastly, the student board representative process is being developed. Ms. Carter and I have met about that. And so they're gonna be going through interviews and hopefully having that person in place to recommend to you as for approval and presentation at the end of November. And there's a lot going on, but I'll keep my comments to that at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Meinke, for your speed reporting. We're going to move on to administrative reports. Dr. Carino.
Thank you. So we have been busy in HR. We had a successful paraprofessional job fair, and so we have an excellent slate of candidates that we will be bringing to you for board approval in the coming weeks. It is typically a very hard position to fill, and we often have many vacancies. But we had a very full list of Zoom candidates that met with Ms. Patel and Ms. Squires. And we actually have a list of people to recommend for positions that may pop up throughout the year, as well as potential substitutes that will be very helpful for positions that may be vacant on a day-to-day basis. We are hiring for a few positions. You've heard we've had a couple resignations, but we have some very qualified candidates that we will be bringing your way in the near future. I would like to reiterate what Mr. Meinke said about the safety fair. It was great to see so many families there. And really, I would just like to thank Officer Warren, Ms. Patel, and Ms. Squires for their leadership. We are negotiating with the NESPA group next week, so we look forward to finalizing their wage reopener. And we continue just our safety and security planning. We are meeting with the Novi Police Department tomorrow. We have submitted our grant for our safety and security for the state, which allows us to secure funds for critical incident mapping and a security risk assessment. And we had Menti Monday this past Monday, and so Mr. Dinkelman presented to new staff about our evaluation process, and Mrs. Griffin presented information to our speech pathologists and social workers about AAC devices, which are communication tools for speech or language impaired students. And so it was very effective and worthwhile professional learning for them. So we are doing lots of things.
Thank you, Dr. Carino. We'll move on to Mr. Giramini.
Thank you, Dr. Ruskin. Echoing the safety fair success, I also want to highlight that the Special Education Parent Advisory Committee and our special education department. Their next event, because they're busy people and busy planners, is November 12th. It is a sensory-friendly woodland winter event at the Roar Center. Be arts and crafts, mobile market will be there, the therapy dogs will be there, opportunity for pictures with Santa, and all sorts of fun things. More info about that will be released soon. This week is Digital Citizenship Week. Our tech department, along with the Novi Public Library, and with the support of NEF, the Novi Educational Foundation, brought Dr. Devorah Heitner. She's the author of Screenwise, a text that Mr. Mike actually read as part of his superintendent's book study with the community. It's about mentoring kids to thrive in the digital world. It was a very nice talk, well attended. It was just another successful community event, really a testament to the power of partnering with our families to support our kids. Our next district-provided professional development day is November 8th, and planning is underway. Just a reminder that there is no school that day, and it is election day. And finally, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge our instructional coaches in our school district. They are amazing assets supporting our teachers, implementing curriculum, district improvement efforts, and more. I'm so happy to work with them. I just want to acknowledge them. Kathleen Ader, Brittany Pierce, Ainsley Langridge, Lisa Laporte, and Katie Walker. Thank you to them.
Thank you very much. Okay, we will move on to board communication. I know that we had an opportunity for celebrations earlier, but if there's any other board communication, please speak now. Mr. Mena.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that tomorrow is the 5th and final regular season home game for Novi football. I say that football, but it really is more than just a football game. There are other groups that participate on Friday nights in Novi, and tomorrow will be especially nice because it's senior night. We've got about 75 seniors that will be recognized, including one of yours. And that'll be football players, cheer, pom, dance, as well as quite a number of band members tomorrow. So looking forward to that, and hopefully it won't be the last home game. Hopefully Novi will make the playoffs. They'll have victory tomorrow, and they'll leapfrog enough teams where their first playoff game will be a home game. But we'll see. And then once that's done, then we look forward to start shifting over to the winter sports, including basketball, and seeing the use of the technology that we invested in the performance gym. We've got some new video boards in there that we're looking forward to see running. So
Thank you.
that's it.
Any other board communication? Mrs. Hood?
Yeah, just a quick, we've already heard about Novi Educational Foundation a couple times this evening. I attended their meeting on Monday. Mr. Menka provided the Novi Schools update. Thank you. And we reviewed some of the events that they have sponsored, including the Screenwise, the book review, parent camp. They made $4,900 at the pancake breakfast. And they are starting planning for the next Green Gala, which will be 3D this year, and it will be April 15th.
What does that mean?
3D, alive,
Oh,
Not
in person.
Oh, back to normal?
Yeah, yep,
Oh.
okay,
April 15th.
Great.
3D.
thanks.
Thank you.
Any other board communication? Mrs. Roney?
Just a reminder that Saturday is the craft show at the high school from, I believe it's 10 to 4. There's a nominal fee to get in, and there'll be lots of yummy things to buy. And I mean yummy, I don't mean like food, I mean other wonderful things too.
But there is food.
There's food.
Great, thanks for that reminder. Any other board communication?
Yeah.
Mr. Cook?
Mr. Mena's comment on Friday nights just kind of reminded me of a comment that a community member made to me. A lot of kids would go up to football players after the game and want their picture taken with them. And the football players were more than happy to stand there and have their picture taken. When the kids would leave, the photographer would say, "Did you know them?" And they said, "No, have no idea who they were." So it goes to show that our football players are being noticed. Our football players are also being role models to a lot of younger kids and a lot of other people. And the way they carry themselves during and after the games is really outstanding, and I just want to publicly say that, you know, they show Novi proud, so.
Great, thank you. I think we've had, on that note too, I think we've had an exceptional student section this year. It's really vibrant and razzing, and our Cat Pack is doing a really great job, and it feels really great to be over there at the football field and watch all the students, whether they are playing football, doing pom, cheer, band, or just being spectators. They're doing a lovely job and really just carrying that Novi pride proudly, so it's great. Any other comments?
Oh, yeah, and one thing that Mr. Mena forgot to mention is, not only is it senior night on Friday night, it is youth night. So any
great.
kid playing for middle school, Bobcats, and, you know, if they wear their jersey, they get in free. And, you know, we will also be honoring the future Wildcats.
That's great, thank you. Any other comments? Okay, seeing none, we are going to be moving to closed session. And just an announcement before we take a roll call on that. We will be coming back only to adjourn the meeting, so there will be no action taken after our closed session. So if I may get a motion for the recommendation to go into closed session. For the purpose, we have to read the purpose, I think.
Oh, sorry, I closed my.
Oh, you're done, okay.
It has,
No one, go ahead.
You got it open?
that the Novi Community School Board of Education move into a closed session to consider security planning for school safety.
Do we have support?
Support.
Recommended by Mrs. Roney, supported by Mr. Mena. Mr. Cook, if we can get a roll call vote, please.
Trustee Cook, yes. Trustee Hood,
Yes.
Trustee Mena.
Yes.
Trustee Roney,
Yes.
Trustee Ruskin,
Yes.
Trustee Smith.
Yes.
6-0.
6-0. We will go into our closed session and be back for our adjournment shortly.
Thank you.
Here we are.
We are back from closed session. If I may get a motion for adjournment,
Motion to adjourn?
Support.
recommended by Mr. Mena and supported by Mrs. Roney. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 6-0.
Thank you.